Hi, everyone. My name is Brent Sexton. I got my SAG card in 1989. Been a working actor for 34 years. I'm currently running for the National Board and local LA Board. I'm here today with Brian Hamilton. I met Brian on a Zoom call for the first time over a year ago. This is the first time we're meeting in person. He spoke about some history of the union that I think is extremely valuable and that most people don't know about. And so I asked if he would do this interview with me so we could share this information with everybody. Hi, Brian.
Hi.
All right. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, your family, and your time in our union?
Sure. Yeah. I was born in Rockland County, New York, which borders New Jersey. I did a lot of theater, equity repertory theater, from age 15 to 21. And then I moved out here to LA. I did my first commercial in 1991. My dad was one of the heads of the Carpenters Union for Rockland and Orange County. So I grew up in a union family. We used to drive by a shopping mall, and my dad would say, "We shop there, they built that union." Or, "We don't shop there, they didn't build that union." That was always ingrained in my mind throughout my whole life. Never crossed a picket line in my life, never will. And I know that every dollar that my dad has in his pension right now is because he was a union member.
So you have great knowledge as far as what a union is, what a union does, what it's supposed to do from an early age.
Some because of just being there, and some because I sought it out on my own. Yeah.
So just so that we're all on the same page, let's talk about how and why SAG was formed, the foundation, and what its purpose was, specifically as far as the bargaining agreement and the NLRB.
So the Screen Actors Guild was incorporated as a nonprofit corporation in 1933 by a very brave group of individuals. I won't name them, we'll put them on the screen. And at the time, Hollywood and the entire entertainment industry was controlled by a handful of very powerful moguls, like the Zanuck brothers and the Warner brothers. I think there were 4 of them, and Walt Disney and Louis B. Mayer. They controlled everything. So to go up against these guys meant risking being unemployed for the rest of your existence. We subsequently saw what they did when they accused people of being communists. Suddenly people were unemployed forever and ever. So it took incredible bravery to initiate a request for recognition as a bargaining unit. Now, what a bargaining unit is when a group of craftspeople come together who perform a certain task and they petition the government for regulation, or for recognition rather, and that's what happened basically. So the group got together and formed the bargaining unit, which became the union.
The Screen Actors Guild.
Yes.
Right. And this group, their job was acting in front of a camera.
Right. Well, see, that's the thing that confused people over the decades, but not for a while.
Okay.
It's easy to understand what carpenters do. They build structures. They use wood and nails and sheetrock, and that's what they do. Most people wouldn't be confused by that. If you look at what electricians do in the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, they put conduit through walls. They work with junction boxes and ground fault interrupters and stuff like that. We know what electricians do. But let's say, here's a quick, for instance. Let's say that while the carpenters were doing their work and putting the walls up, they said, while we're in there, why don't we just put in the junction boxes and wire the conduit through there? They won't have to hire the electricians. They'll save a lot of money. Well, that would be very quickly jumped on by the IBEW's lawyers. They'd say, no, that is our bargaining unit. We represent that for our people. So if you look at the parallel of what happened in the last 25, 30 years with Screen Actors Guild, there was no uncertainty about the bargaining unit. Screen actors are actors who perform in front of a camera. That's easy to understand.
So there was a question of jurisdiction,
right?
At some point.
That's the catchphrase that's used, jurisdiction. It's actually the bargaining unit. Yeah.
Okay. So what was the conflict then?
There was no conflict. It was manufactured.
How was it manufactured?
Well, it depends on which decade you want to go to first.
Well, let's start back then, because we know that the American Federation of Radio Artists became...
Right. So let's go back to 1933. You've got this new union, Screen Actors Guild. It wasn't until 1937 that it was fully recognized, and Louis B. Mayer was the one who hung on. He did not want to validate this new union's existence.
Interesting.
Because it gave away their power to hire and fire and control everything. And so what happened was, let's go from 1933 up to like the 1950s, when you've got basically two unions for performers that exist at that point in time in media. You've got the American Federation of Radio Artists and Screen Actors Guild. You stand in front of a microphone, it goes out over the airwaves, and that's it. Some radio programs were taped on audio tape when that came out, but that was no threat to the bargaining unit of Screen Actors Guild. Actors in front of a camera, it appears upon a screen. So along came this new technology called television. And that's where the confusion began, although it wasn't really a big thing, because they had been broadcasting television shows and kinescoping them. Now, kinescoping is a very simple process. They put a film camera on top of the television camera and basically filmed whatever the television camera saw.
On the monitor. They filmed the monitor.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they didn't do it for any nefarious reason. They did it because they wanted to have the time zones equal. So if you shot something at 8 p.m. on the West Coast, you wanted it to show on the East Coast at 8 p.m. So they made a copy. They kinescoped it.
Okay.
Now that created a copy that could be saved, but they didn't have the concept or the ability to do what we later did know as reruns. That was actually invented by Desilu, by Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball. Okay. But we'll go down that avenue at a moment.
Yep.
So you've got kinescoping, which preserves a copy so it can be broadcast later in different time zones. But there really was no big conflict because they weren't trying to usurp the territory of Screen Actors Guild, of the bargaining unit there.
So when did the conflict escalate? Somewhere between the 50s and the 80s, I assume, or is okay?
There was a decision made by what was called TVA, the Television Authority, which granted jurisdiction over television that's performed in a live manner. Now, in a live manner means it's instantly disseminated over the airwaves, like the evening news would be, like SNL is principally, even though it's slightly delayed. So television in a live manner then meant the Red Skelton Show, that was included, then also meant the Ed Sullivan Show. That went out live. So it gave TV performed in a live manner, that went to AFRA, which had become AFTRA.
So where did the problem come in? How did it, what became the conflict of jurisdiction, this supposed jurisdiction?
There were very little unmanageable problems that actually sought an intervention at that point.
Tell us what the intervention is first.
Okay. Let's say, let's look at the hypothetical example that I gave with the Carpenters Union and the electrical workers.
How does it get resolved?
So let's say you've got that dilemma, and it's a real dilemma. What would happen is, first of all, the lawyers in-house in each union would get together and go, no, this is our bargaining unit. Well, no, it's our bargaining unit. Well, here's why it's our bargaining unit. They would do a back and forth. They'd resolve it. But if something couldn't be resolved in that manner, they would appeal to or file for a bargaining unit clarification. And that still holds true today.
That's with the National Labor Relations.
Right.
Correct?
Now there's a National Labor Relations Board which interprets and enforces the National Labor Relations Act, which is kind of like a constitution for labor.
Right.
So let's say you and I were union reps right now.
Okay.
And we were at an impasse. So we would file for a bargaining unit clarification, and then they would either decide based on submitted material, whether it's yours or whether it's mine, and that would be the rule, or they would have like a hearing. Yeah.
Interesting. Let's jump ahead, say, to the early 2000s. What happened back then, and how was our union changed because of it?
Oh, wow. A lot of things happened, and they happened quickly, and they happened so fast a lot of us couldn't really tell what was happening until we sat down and took a breather. I did my first TV commercial on camera in 1991. So by the time May 1st of 2000 came around, I had a very strong interest in continuing what I had come to know as semi-regular employment. And I had some pension credits going too.
What happened?
Basically what happened is the JPC, which is the Joint Policy Committee, they are a small group, almost like the AMPTP, but they represent the advertising agencies, all the monster advertising agencies that controlled advertising. They wanted to eliminate residuals altogether, not just not pay Class A anymore, but they wanted to completely eliminate residuals altogether. But here was the thing. At that point in time, the amount of actor income that was from television commercials was more than 50%. That contract, the commercial contract for actors, was worth over $1 billion a year in SAG income. So doing what they wanted to do would have killed the union completely, literally. It would not be able to survive that kind of diminution of income.
So what'd we do?
We went on strike. And by that, I mean that it was a unanimous vote from AFTRA, the AFTRA board, and the Screen Actors Guild board of directors. Everybody voted yes to go on strike. And it was a long strike. It was arduous. It went through the summer heat. Yeah. And there were a couple pivotal events along the way. I mean, there were picket actions every day somewhere. And I made sure that if I didn't have something else important to do, that I was out there. And I was out there a lot with my friends and colleagues. And I remember Todd Amorte said, "You're going to find out who your real friends are." Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we did. And I remember being in the Cagney room, which kind of looked like, you know, command central for an army or a war that was going on. There were phones ringing. There were people calling, you know, to get volunteers to show up. But I'll never forget, as the months went on, we got tired of the routine, go to a picket line, make a lot of noise, you know, shake your soda cans with the dimes in them. We didn't feel like we were getting enough attention. And it went from May, June, July, August, September, October. Mm-hmm. This is a long, arduous strike. So a bunch of us, rebel actors like me, we got together and we created our own picket action demonstration. We found out that there was a screening of Elizabeth Hurley's new movie called Bedazzled over in Westwood. And we decided to punish her for working scab jobs for Estee Lauder. She was signed to a lucrative contract with Estee Lauder, and she shot the commercials anyway. And she was making something like $5 million, you know, as the gorgeous sponsor or, you know, spokesperson of Estee Lauder. And we showed up, surprise picket action. We went there. We had our strike shirts underneath another shirt. We had signs folded up in our pocket. And we all agreed on a time when we were going to take the whistles out, open up our shirts. Suddenly, all hell broke loose. This phalanx of cameras that was pointed, trained at the area where all the celebrities would be showing up, including Miss Hurley. Suddenly, the camera lenses just swung over to this group of loud actors with picket signs. And we had signs that said, "Elizabeth Scably, you make us hurl." And it was all over the Sun, which is like the tabloid in England. And here's what happened. The strike ended the next day.
Amazing.
It was like the shot that was heard around the world. And it symbolized actors getting together and saying, all right, we don't need the say-so of the union to be active and go off in a different
Yeah.
Right. And so we finished the job ourselves.
Yeah.
We didn't wait for the lawyers to come out and say, we'll do this, but you can't step over here, which is what we were getting a lot of. And it really ticked me off because you don't get a lot of the things that you should get if you tiptoe around and color between the lines, that don't work.
Right. Okay, so let's cut to the end of the strike.
Right.
What was going on in the union? Something happened. How did it change?
Okay. It was the end of a cataclysmic set of events. Try to say that 5 times. And we had elections coming up in 2001. And they had hired a new NED, National Executive Director, whose name was Anthony Robert Pisano. Now, he came from probably one of the most prestigious law firms in California called O'Melveny and Myers. And he asked for something that hadn't been asked for before. He wanted to not just be the National Executive Director, he wanted to be the CEO, Chief Executive Officer, which gave him a lot of powers that other National Executive Directors didn't have. Like the power to hire and fire people, executive staff, without board consent or approval. Whereas theretofore, if the board of directors decided somebody was going against the grain and we didn't want them or they were being destructive, the board could vote to let them go.
What about salaries? Was that a power that he also had?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it gave him the same sets of powers that a chief executive officer of a corporation would have. So for many of us observers and participants who were paying attention to what was going on, we saw that as the beginning of corporatizing a union that was membership driven before. So Anthony Robert Pisano is the new NED CEO. Then up come our elections we're in 2001 now, and Valerie Harper ran against Melissa Gilbert. And something happened. It was alleged that there were improprieties in the election. So the Department of Labor looked at it, and they decided that there were. They ordered a rerun of the election, and Melissa Gilbert won again, fair and square. So she became the president of Screen Actors Guild, swept the board majority with her like-minded individuals. I think they were called United for Strength at that point in time.
So what happened with the union in 2003?
2003 was one of the most cataclysmic years since the strike, which was only 2 years before that. Melissa Gilbert, who had a board majority with the new NED CEO, Robert Pisano, they put together what they called a consolidation affiliation. They didn't call it a merger, but members talked about it as if it were a merger. It was very confusing. There was no clear and present urgency to merge, to dissolve, to do anything with Screen Actors Guild. AFTRA and SAG already bargained jointly. Yeah. But suddenly we were given this material to vote on right now, or the roof is going to cave in. And we had questions like, what's going to happen with the pension plan? What is going to happen with the health plan? And there were a lot of unanswered questions. And as usual, the union is only required to spend money to promote what the majority decision of the board is. So those of us who felt that this wasn't the right thing to do, we had to go and raise money on our own to get an alternate viewpoint to the members. A lot of what the union was saying as part of this promotional package for the consolidation affiliation was flat out false and even borderline illegal. When you have a pension plan, it's overseen by a board of trustees, and half of those trustees are for management, and half of those trustees are for the members of the union. Unbeknownst to all of us at large, one of the trustees named Sheldon Kasdan had commissioned something called the Mercer feasibility study. And that was to see if it was feasible financially for Screen Actors Guild's pension and health plans to merge with AFTRA's pension and health plans. And the results of it became known as the Kasdan Memo or the Kasdan Memorandum. That was leaked to me, and I in turn leaked it to the entire membership via this new thing called the internet, which was out only for a couple of years for most of us. And it told the truth that there would be a diminution of benefits, that Screen Actors Guild would be subsidizing AFTRA. And I jokingly said it would be like if George Clooney married the girl down the street living in the trailer park, living on food stamps with 10 kids. That's what kind of subsidization would have occurred if Screen Actors Guild commingled its assets with AFTRA.
So it was a bailout.
It was a bailout in no uncertain terms. And not only that, it was called AMA. They were going to create a new union called the Alliance of International Media Artists. Could you imagine saying, look, Mom, I got my AMA card. Johnny, I thought you were going to be an actor and make us all proud. Right. So we laughed at that on his face, but it was so serious because they really wanted us to vote for this. We got dues inserts in the mail. We got inserts with your residual check. When you called and put on hold, there was an announcer saying, vote for the consolidation. They had a table outside the credit union. It was sell, 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 sell. They spent well over $1 million pushing this consolidation affiliation on us. So that's why I say it was a cataclysmic event after the most recent cataclysmic event.
The strike. Yeah.
We had two. Now, here's what happened. I was with a group of actors who thought very strongly that this was not okay and we needed to vote it down. But as I said, we had no money.
You had no voice.
The union doesn't give you money to go promulgate your
dissent.
Your dissent. Thank you. I couldn't think of a word for a moment. So what we did was I had taught myself how to design web pages. And I created a mirror image of the page that the union had spent a lot of money on with their slick material. And I made it like a satire of their page with all of our contra information. Yeah. And we needed something to go in the mail so that people who didn't have internet or who weren't that savvy would get a flyer that had the facts in it. So we needed about $30,000. And there was an angel in human form that appeared, this lady named Lynn Wood. She, after we told her what was going to happen, that they were going to try to dissolve Screen Actors Guild and build another one, another union called AMA, she said, how much money do you need? And someone in our group, Dave Jolliffe, said, well, to get a mailer out to the membership, we need about $30,000. And she said, you got it. I'll have you a check tomorrow. And she got a check to us the next day. And that's how we were able to pay for a mailer that had the truth about what was really going to happen, the facts, and got it to all the members. For this thing to pass, they needed a 60% supermajority. It failed. AMA failed by 2.8%. That's how the first so-called merger was defeated. Now, do you want to talk about what a merger really is?
I really would, because when I bring the subject up to a lot of people, they think, what, is it like a marriage? Or that's sort of what they have in their mind. But I think it goes beyond that.
Or if you look at like the merger of two people in what we call a marriage, two people come together, they commingle their assets, but they don't relinquish their individuality. They don't become one human. They're just two humans, but they commingle their assets. That's not at all what was being proposed here. What was being proposed here was Screen Actors Guild would be dissolved and cease to exist. AFTRA, same thing, dissolved, cease to exist, and create a new singular entity called AMA. Yes, that's what they tried to do.
Okay, so let's jump again.
Flash forward a little bit.
2011, 2012, right? Because there was a lot going on then.
Yes.
And there was certainly, I think, a lot of fear in the air. The question of this supposed jurisdiction that sort of thing.
Well, we knew they were going to try it again. We knew that when the opposition group got back in power, that they were going to try for another so-called merger. So what happened is, back in 2003, after the AMA proposition failed, Alan Rosenberg was elected. So it's like the opposition was back. And then when there was another switcheroo, we knew that they were going to try another stab at taking care of their so-called merger.
So who was president back then, 2011, 2012?
Ken Howard. And he also had a majority of like-minded individuals, just like Melissa Gilbert had before. This time, they were smarter. David White was the head legal counsel, I'm pretty sure. He and Duncan Crabtree Ireland and Mathis Dunn and several other legal types who were on salary with Screen Actors Guild, they got together and they created the basis for a new union.
So 2011, 12, Ken Howard's president, but you weren't on the board at that time.
I wasn't, and it actually proved to be of value because I was able to say and do things that became punishable, that became unbelievably draconian.
If you were a board member.
Right.
So let's talk about that, because there seems to be like a lot of fear peddling that was happening back then.
Well, what happened was the lawyers and executives of Screen Actors Guild at that point had created a new union constitution that would be put into effect, of course, with the union's vote. But what they did is, knowing that there would be a lot of dissent in the boardroom, they did something very crafty and borderline illegal in the minds of a lot of members who were observing this. They made a rule that was called a non-disparagement rule or non-disparagement clause. David White sent a directive to everyone on the boards of directors of AFTRA and the board of directors of Screen Actors Guild that you could not say one thing or anything critical of either of the unions.
This is because they wanted the merger. This was the next merger.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So here you have people who were duly elected to the Screen Actors Guild Board of Directors, knowing that there were others on the board who wanted to destroy the union that couldn't say one thing about it. And one guy who I know was on the board, I won't mention his name, was on the board for years. He was petrified that they would come and take his house, that he would get sued.
What was the punishment, they said?
It was monetary.
Heavily fined?
Heavy fined, expulsion, et cetera,
and
so,
possible lawsuit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I have that exact letter. So what I did is I was really ticked off at this because it's anti-democratic. It completely disregards and neuters the will of the membership who voted for people to represent them on the board, many of whom did not want there to be any merger or so-called merger. It was another debacle. And what they did, again...
Yeah,
did you want to jump in?
Well, I was going to ask, so as far as the merger, the marriage,
right?
Did we get a true merger?
Well, they didn't quite get there until they did something else that was very crafty.
Which was?
In following. They created what is known as the problem reaction solution. Anybody who studies...
explain that for everybody.
Okay, there's a philosopher called Hegel who's credited with this. It's also called thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You have something that you want to implement, that you want the people to accept, like a set of rules, a law, but you have to create an atmosphere where they will cry for it to be implemented. So you have the problem, which you allow to fester, exacerbate, fear. Right, to instill fear. And then you have the reaction to it, and then it allows you to implement it because they will scream for it. So here's what happened. AFTRA was usurping Screen Actors Guild's bargaining unit. And the basis upon which they were doing that was they said, well, no, these programs are shot on digital. Whereas in prior back and forths with the NLRB in the 50s and 60s, it was decided that it doesn't change the nature of the work being performed, whether it's stored on celluloid film, videotape, digital cartridge. Does that change the nature of your work as an actor?
Not at all.
It doesn't. An actor performs in front of a camera. That's the essence of the bargaining unit of Screen Actors.
Mm-hmm.
So over 20 pilots were organized and being shot by AFTRA contracts. And guess what the Screen Actors Guild did and didn't do?
Tell us.
Well, they didn't get a bargaining unit clarification, I'll tell you that. That's the first thing that they
That two-page
should have
form
done.
that you get from the National Labor Relations Board website. Okay.
Exactly. Because the board had been neutered. They were petrified of saying anything. And I knew about a bargaining unit clarification, so I got in touch with a couple of others, and they couldn't insert it into any of it because they were shut out. They were absolutely shut out. So what the proponents of this new merger had done was they effectively created a henny penny the sky is falling in urgency by saying, oh my God, look, AFTRA's poaching our contracts. That was the word and the phrase they used, poaching our contracts. You have to help us here. We have to merge with AFTRA. That's the only way to solve this problem. Of course it wasn't, and it wasn't even halfway necessary. So in my infinite frustration, I contacted the Department of Labor with several other members, with Michael Bell, who is very well known as a union activist. He's in his 80s now, and two other actors. And we submitted, I wrote it myself. I'm not a lawyer. I thought, well, all I can do is try. And we got past square one. Usually when you file a complaint down, it's in Westwood, they just say, well, this is this and this is this, and sorry, that's not, and that's it. We got past all that, and we got heard before the National Labor Relations Board in Washington, D.C. And it was rejected ultimately for a surprising reason, but it's one of those, open up your eyes, Johnny, this is the real world.
And that.
According to the rules and the law that the National Labor Relations Board upholds and enforces, a union does not have to do a great job. And that includes enforcing the language that's in their own Constitution. The language in our Constitution says that they have to uphold and maintain and increase the wages and working conditions for our members, etc. So it led most of us to say, well, why aren't you doing anything? Why don't you get a bargaining unit clarification going? What's wrong, Screen Actors Guild? There wasn't anything wrong. The people in power wanted it to happen. So they stood back while the barn was on fire with the hoses in their hands and, oh, is that smoke? Oh, gee, what should we do? Merge, merge, merge. Make them say merge. And then everybody screamed merge and they voted for it. And that's how that merger got passed. But the reason why the NLRB could not force them to do a bargaining unit clarification is a union is allowed to do a crappy job. The duty of fair representation is so basic and pragmatic. It's basically they can't discriminate based on race, creed, color, sexual orientation, yada, yada, yada. And as long as they don't violate that, they're good.
Anything else works. Anything else flies.
The union, Screen Actors Guild, was allowed to sit there and watch AFTRA run away with the house and the money and everything.
And all they had to do was download the two-page form.
That's right.
And submit it to the National Labor Relations.
That's right. It would have frozen everything.